let's go ahead and get into it, because I
Yeah.
really do want the audience to hear your story, perhaps now more than ever. If you could, would you tell us a little bit about what led to you creating the Performers Pod?
Yeah, so I had this really strange interaction with a BBC journalist in 2020, and they were asking extremely like triggering questions and kind of just really trying to bait for answers about my personal sex life and all this stuff about trans women invading lesbian spaces and just like all these kind of turf talking points.
Mm-hmm.
So I really thought nothing of it at the time. I was like, oh, that makes me really disappointed. And then I was like, wait, I really need to create a space for performers to talk in a long format where we can just talk about our own experiences about being in porn on our own terms. So I started doing this, and then the BBC article came out that caused quite an outrage in the UK. It was later attached to Lily Cade's anti-trans manifesto, where she called for, I mean, the stuff they said in that, so wild. They called for explicitly the lynching of specific Black women, which is completely abhorrent.
Mm-hmm.
Vigilante justice against trans people. But then my favorite part of it is they said they committed voter fraud for Joe Biden in California. Like, why would you need to do that?
Yeah.
It's going blue. It's all right. So yeah, I just wanted to create a space for performers to be able to talk in a long format. Even the more progressive media coverage of porn, it's still so often trying to bait quote unquote ethical porn into bad mouthing mainstream porn, or they just
Mm.
want your blowjob tips or all these like little small kind of sensationalist things.
Yeah.
So I wanted a space for us to talk about anything and everything about this industry.
Sure. Well, and I'll tell people that you can learn more about the brouhaha that kind of led to all of this through some of the articles and things that I have listed in the show notes for this episode. But I want to return really quickly to what you said about quote unquote ethical porn, because I heard your conversation. I was listening to the episode that you did with Disco Tits,
Yeah,
and y'all
they're
talked
amazing
a
UK
little.
performer.
Yeah, really, really interesting conversation. And I frankly felt at least a little bit called out, because we do this show. We often push for people to be certainly paying for their porn, but also to be ethical consumers of porn and these kinds of things. And I have had this sort of growing discomfort around I guess, like the Erica Lust notion of ethical porn, which is something that we had talked about a number of times. That was a name that came up a
Yeah.
lot when we first started doing this
Yeah.
show, and y'all had some insights that I felt were really, really profound. And I don't know if you could briefly address Erica Lust or some of those ideas.
Yeah, that person specifically, I have very strong feelings about, and I don't want to go into completely on
Sure,
this
fair,
podcast,
valid.
because it would not be good. So, I think there's a lot of like a gentrification of particularly the European porn scene. Um, what exists in Berlin right now and has existed in Berlin for the last 5 or 6 years is this really unique art porn movement that people are collaborating just to collaborate. It's not really porn that's necessarily being designed like in the United States to directly make money. It might be political, it can be all sorts of things. And there's this really huge festival, the Berlin Porn Film Festival, that screens in the oldest theater in Germany. It's 2 or 3 theaters throughout the city, and there's screen porn from noon until midnight. And before the pandemic, every single screening was completely sold out. These are theaters of 2 to 500. So just continuously, yeah, there's just that inspiration in the Berlin porn scene. And I feel like there's been a lot of companies that have gone in there and really just tried to co-opt that and just
Mm-hmm.
really try to profit off of that. And I think that's just extremely unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah, the message that that porn can be art. Here in the States, like we often talk about that idea of what's the difference between art and porn? Like I'll know it when I see it, and that Supreme Court decision and these kinds of things. And increasingly, as I do this work and as I meet creators and performers like you yourself and some of the other wonderful people we've had on this show, I'm impressed by the idea that that distinction really doesn't feel useful or necessary in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
it's changed a lot. Honestly, 5 years ago, AVN is our version of the Oscars.
Mhm.
Almost meets the Olympics because you have everyone coming in from all around the world.
Mhm.
So you have people coming from Asia, you have people coming from Europe, truly everywhere. Um, and 5 years ago there, saying porn was art, you would get laughed at by most mainstream porn people. Now, these accepted speeches are talking about porn as their art. And I think just the way people are treating porn now is a lot more serious within the industry. And
Mhm.
I think there's so much more artistry with directors now because many of them were in the industry as performers. So I think you're just seeing a real change in the industry where it's not these mostly older cis men who just want, okay, we have to do the scene this way, this way, this way, and that's how you make money. There's like
Right.
truly filmmaking going on now. And I think it's just really improved for the better of the industry as a whole.
Yeah, and I have to say, anybody who is listening to this that's kind of scratching their head, wondering what the hell we're talking about, I might suggest that you would be less in the dark if you weren't relying on the front page of Pornhub or whatever your favorite tube site is, and we're actually like participating in the art of porn. That you would see a lot more of this, and there is a lot to be excited about in that sense.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of different kinds of porn. I think there's art porn that it's great to watch a screening of. I think there's also porn that people just masturbate to and get off to. I think there's just so many reasons for porn to exist, whether it's a political statement. I just feel like the more you kind of detach from the American idea of porn specifically,
Hmm.
you just learn that there's so many different industries worldwide with so many different reasons why people are getting into it.
Yeah. Well, in speaking about your podcast or about that idea of, I guess, news media representation, I feel like usually when we talk about media representation, it's questions about like how many TV and movie actors are from a particular background, or
Mhm.
how is a particular minority being represented in fiction. But broadly speaking, what do you feel like the news media gets right or wrong about their coverage of sex work?
I feel like they just want to be sensationalized, and I feel like that's what the media kind of
It's not about
thrives
reporting the
on.
news. Those are
Yeah,
like the big interest draw 'em in stories.
yeah, it's about getting the ads, and it's just I don't think most people take porn seriously enough. So then when they're uneducated about it, like going off of tropes from 10 years ago, we're thinking porn is so like it is in the 90s and we're all millionaires.
Mhm.
It's just so wild that most people don't really know about porn because they never really put that research in themselves. And I think it's just another medium, and I think it should be taken as seriously as any other medium. And I think in Europe it is taken more seriously because there's festivals all around Europe. There's a few in the States, but it's really a thing in Europe, and it's also spreading now. There's quite a few queer porn film festivals and just porn film festivals in general in Latin America now, in Chile and Brazil.
Yeah, I mean, there might be some small portion of our audience that has been to Dan Savage's, like, Hump Fest, but
Yeah.
beyond that, I don't feel like there is, that there's a lot of comfort, that there's, like, even a lot of awareness of the concept of a porn festival.
Yeah, it's just different in the United States. I think what Dan is doing with that is great, and it's getting that specific kind of porn out, and that's fun. But I think there really hopefully should be bigger festivals in the United States.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just not to the same level where we have these giant conventions here, which are great, but you're not really seeing your peers work. And that's kind of hard because when you do go to a thing like Berlin, you get to see everyone's work. So people are being more inspired by each other, wanting to collaborate more. I think it's just a really big difference.
Yeah, it's a little bit more. Boy, I don't know if it's fair to call it sycophantic, but there's more of that sort of like fan service idea. It's more
Yeah.
of like a Comic-Con type of fest than it is like the Cannes Film Festival kind of fest. You know, it's
Yeah.
less about the art itself and more about the fandom. Is that fair to
Yeah.
say?
Yeah. I also feel like just how porn stars are treated in this country, it's almost like being a mini pop star
Mm-hmm.
because all of your stuff is branded this way. All of it's, you have fans and a fandom and all this stuff. And it's just so different than
You're not
in
seen
Europe
as
where it's
a
just about the
creator.
medium.
Yeah, it's less about like because when a filmmaker like creates and directs a film, they might have something of of like a personal perspective, or we might consider them an
Mhm.
auteur. We might see that end of things, but we don't expect them to be that person. Whereas a
Yeah.
pop star is more of like an icon in a certain
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Taylor Swift, no matter where. I feel like that's
Right.
kind of how it is with porn.
Hmm.
Like, most people don't recognize you, but when they do, it's like they're meeting to them someone who's like famous, which is very strange.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the like pet narratives or like weird fixations or obsessions that you see in the news media?
I think people want to think about all of porn's problems are related to sex, and that's one of the most small parts of actual porn. The amount of work that goes into editing, that goes into scheduling, that goes into just maintaining a career is so intense, and just trying to keep up with that. I feel like it's you're part artist, you're part athlete because your body has to physically perform to a level that most people can't. Most people can't have
Sure.
sex in a room full of 10 people on a crew, you know? Like as much as it becomes normalized for us as performers, it's still not an easy thing to do, and it's not a thing that's just automatic. So
Yeah,
I feel
anybody
like
who's
it's
tried
just
to recreate the positions that they see on camera, I think should have at least a vague understanding of that. But it really is worth highlighting.
yeah, it's truly a physical ability, and it's just yeah, most people can't do that. And especially in porn, you get so used to all this stuff and you're like, "Oh yeah, that's normal," but when you then have sex with someone maybe totally outside of that world, you're just like, "Oh wow, so different."
Hmm.
But yeah, I also think performing is so much just about trying to make your partner look like they're the best performer in the world and vice versa, and just trying to perform to the best of your ability. So I think just kind of not centering the sex and sex work
Mm-hmm.
and actually viewing us as people who are having full careers with all of this, I think is really important. And I think that's kind of the narrative that people don't want to talk about because to most people, sex is exciting and they want to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and just a willingness to like more flesh that out, like to understand the bigger picture. We recognize that, our big name actors are acting, and when we have press junkets, like we ask them about their lives or about their diet or these different kinds of things. And it is strange that we don't have that same perception of a porn star. We imagine them as basically somebody who shows up and fucks really prettily, and that's
Yeah.
it. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to, athletes and the way the media treats athletes, is they don't wanna hear about all the stuff that goes into it. They just
Mhm.
wanna see you perform in the game, then ask you the question, "Oh, how did that go?"
Yeah.
Or, like, sensationalizing what you're doing without actual that much care for your own mental health, what it takes to be a performer. I think it's just they want, porn to kind of fit into that same narrative.
Yeah, well, and when there is a big national news story around porn, how do we get it right or wrong? In the last couple of years, what when porn has been in the news, what have you noticed?
I mean, I feel like porn right before the pandemic, I felt like it was as big as it could get in America. Like most people could name Stormy Daniels. There were like a few other performers that were linked to Trump that like were mainstream news at the time.
Mhm.
I feel like it just became so normalized. And then AVN started getting really, really big musical guests. Like they had Cardi B the week before the Grammys, where she won Best Rap album for being the first woman. So I just feel like it got so big probably until like 2020 that it just felt like porn was getting bigger every year. And especially like the big conventions, they were just getting bigger and bigger, and there was just more and more people. So I think it's just a very interesting thing what porn went through. But I think now it's in its whole different reality post COVID, like the whole rise of OnlyFans, and there's performers who've had their entire career during the pandemic now. So it's just such a different mindset than when I started 7 years ago.
Yeah, no doubt. Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about OnlyFans for a moment because I know that during the pandemic, we've seen the workforce shift and change in a lot of very strange ways. I'm certainly not an economist, but I know that OnlyFans is a player in that sense. And
Mhm.
then we have the huge media story around the porn ban and then the reversal. How do you feel the news media handled all of that? What did they get right or get wrong if somebody has only been following these stories through CNN, say?
Um, so actually I had a performer, her name's Jordan Max, and she started on OnlyFans. She's an up and coming performer, had her entire career during the pandemic. And I talked to her, I believe, the day after. And it's just like, as a sex worker, you almost have to be ready for these sites to fail and to kick you off and to do these things where it's just eventually, I'm sure I'm going to get my Instagram banned. I'm not doing anything wrong, but it's being a sex worker. You're naturally going to have this stuff taken. I had my PayPal taken, I had my Google Wallet taken for being a sex worker. It's just going down the list. And I'm doing all legal sex work, but it doesn't matter. This country criminalizes all sex work. So I think it's just such a hard thing for us to rely on a site like OnlyFans. I think right now they're allowing porn still, but I think there's all these dates that are coming up that they might reverse it or change their guidelines to what they can post. It just feels like there's never ending censorship in the United States for sex workers.
Yeah, yeah, I have heard. I think it was actually Sin Sage, but many people who have been on this show. The biggest advice that we tend to hear for new performers is diversify.
Yep.
Don't just be on OnlyFans. Don't just be on mini clips. Like, get
Yep.
out there, be on as many sites as possible. Is there anything that you might add to that or say about that?
Just do as much as you can on your own, especially now during the pandemic. You can shoot good porn on your iPhone at home. That could be in a film festival, it could be in a award show. Like there's really no barrier anymore.
Yeah, the barrier
Where
to entry is very very low at the moment.
yeah, if you want to be a porn performer, just start making your own stuff. Create a porn Twitter, make your own stuff, and just keep doing what you're doing. Like that's the biggest thing. If you want to have a career outside of that, that's totally an option. But I think building your career from the ground up, I think that's the best way to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, when, that story was all over the news, there was definitely I don't know, definitely a tilt in a lot of the articles I was reading and a lot of advice that seemed kind of dubious to me. When folks who are watching this show hear about a story, like when anytime porn is mentioned in the news, what should we know about that? Like, what assumptions should we make about the way that it's being represented?
I mean, it's probably being represented badly or completely wrong. Um, I think it's just a lot of people want sensationalist story about porn and they want it to be this headline, or on the flip side being like, wow, can you believe this girl's a porn performer? She looks like a girl next door, and oh
Just
wow, this
like you
porn
and
performer is
I.
smart.
Yeah.
Like I just feel like there's all these
Or
stereotypes
she's
and
a
just kind of
struggling
not going
teacher
into it.
next door.
And if she is, that's great that she has a way to make money. Like I truly feel like there's so many narratives to porn, and I think the way it really does relate to sports and athletes is for a lot of people, it's their way out of a really bad situation or from being in poverty. Like there's just so much that really does just personally for people's lives. I don't think that's really highlighted because we want, the sensational story of, oh yeah, porn stars, we just fuck all day, and then like people just burn out and like do whatever. It's just like not really how it works. But I don't think most people want to really dig into it and really learn.
Yeah. Well, so your podcast presents porn performers' voices and gives a
Mhm.
platform in that way. Are there any other like positive voices or outlets in this sphere that you might point people towards as a way of getting a just a better understanding of porn in the news?
Well, I believe my podcast and your podcast are the only ones that exist, right?
Something like that, close to.
Um, yeah, I think just really following the performers and getting their voices on social media, I think is the most important way where you're just directly hearing from the performers. I just think it's so important because there's so much of a tilt whenever we are doing press that they have the article basically written before they even talk to us.
Sure,
They're
I
like,
get
"Oh,
that.
I'm gonna do a porn thing about how this porn is good and this porn's kind of bad." And like, just go directly to us. Most performers are very vocal now because we're really not relying on studios anymore.
Hmm.
So if you want to learn about porn, really just do it. Follow AVN, follow XBiz, follow the performers you like. Just treat it like anything else. Like treat it the same as if you were into film or sports or music or whatever else.
Yeah, yeah. I'll say that I'm very derelict in my social media diet, but in particular, the fact that I'm no longer on Twitter and that I'm not like following porn star Twitter means I feel like I have my finger really far away from the pulse. That
Yeah.
is probably the best place to get like actual news about how actual sex workers are adjusting or adapting or organizing or strategizing around something like the OnlyFans ban or anything else that might be coming down the
Yeah.
pipe.
Yeah, truly like everything porn is on Twitter. Like that's where you're going to find all of it. Like every porn performer's on Twitter. Back in the day that's how we used to get booked is like companies would look at Twitter accounts and be like, "Oh, I want to book this girl." But it's kind of changed over time now that content trades kind of the most common thing, but it's definitely our networking platform.
Yeah.